Welcome back to the Strength and Speed podcast. I'm your host, Strength and Speed owner and Conquer the Gauntlet Pro, Evan Preparis. I've got a guest joining me on today's episode. Before we get to him, though, a quick word from this episode's sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Elite Ops Energy Strips. Elite Ops Energy Strips are the sublingual Listerine type strips you put on your tongue. They've got 100 milligrams of caffeine. Gives you a boost to power you through your day, or if you're in the mid-race. Great product. I like to bring them with me to Toughest Mudders or World's Toughest Mudder or kind of any endurance thing. That way I can pack my gels and have non-caffeinated gels and have the strips as an addition. So that way I don't have to pack like caffeinated gels and non-caffeinated gels. I can just bring one kind. And then if I want the caffeine, I can add it into whatever flavor I'm currently eating at the time. And if anyone wants some, you can use code CTG10. I believe they get you 10% off every order. So you can use it multiple times. It's not just on your first order. Speaking of Elite Ops and Special Operations, joining me, I have the founder and CEO of Green Beret Challenge, which is now called Driven, Mark Ballas. So, Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, Evan, what's going on, buddy?
Nothing much. So I'm going to run down a quick of Mark's bio. He's got a lot in there because he's also got his military stuff in here, and I'll probably touch on some of that. I know some of the acronyms and abbreviations may be lost on people, but any of our military people that are listening to the show, I'm sure will enjoy some more of the details. So Mark's a Green Beret, Army Ranger, 26-year career in the U.S. Army Special Operations. He's a Special Forces instructor and he's a government contractor and deployed all over the world. See, he was used to be in a 7th Special Forces Group and 75th Ranger Regiment. Created Green Beret Challenge, 8-mile team challenge with the goal of, quote-unquote, building better humans. And he's been race director for some pretty big events, right? So 2018 race director for the North American OCR Championships. And then 2016, 17, 19, 18, and 19 nominee for Best Race Director, Best Mid-Level Race Series, and Best North American Race Series through the website Mud Run Guide. He's a Pennsylvania native, now lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, and is currently working for a lethality task force and recently recruited to join a human trafficking rescue team, which I know is a big topic in the news right now. For background on his military, 7th Special Force Group. He was an 18 Charlie and 18 Fox, if anyone knows what those means. I'll just kind of leave it at that. And then 75th Ranger Regiment, 11 Bravo, so infantry guy. And then he's been through a whole bunch of the, like all the cool guy schools in the Army, he's pretty much been to, right? So Special Forces Ranger, Ranger EMT, Scout Swimmer, Jump Master, Spies Fry, Cephalic, Special Forces Advanced Urban Combat, Master Breacher, Small Boat Operations, Small Unit Tactics Instructor, and over 20 deployments to the Middle East. So, Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, Evan. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah. So, like I said, I know a lot of that, those acronyms and abbreviations were lost on people, but I'm sure the military people appreciate a little more detail. Because I'm always like, whenever I hear a military person interviewed, they always like start to go into their bio and they touch on the wave tops. And I'm always like, well, you know, what else? Like, I know there's a lot more because there's like there's all this huge your record brief and stuff like that has all these details.
Yeah, I mean, it's for simplicity. We always downplay and just try to keep it simple, but knowing who you were, who you are, and your background, I figured I'd throw some extra in there.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to talk about, obviously, Green Beret Challenge at OCR in this episode and where you're going in 2020 and beyond, because you're one of the few event series that's actually putting on events this year, which we're going to talk about. But then I also want to know about the history, and also at the end of the episode, we're going to talk a little bit about your experience in Special Forces and specifically at the Special Forces qualification course, you know, because you got to observe a lot of the students go through and see the ones that made it versus see the ones that didn't. But, you know, last time I had a Ranger on the podcast, I had Mark Odette with Spartan Pro, and we never really got to the OCR stuff because we were so focused on the military stuff. So I'm going to push the military stuff to the end this time.
Yeah, that's fine.
So let's start off with Green Beret Challenge. Like you said, you started in 2012. You know, where did the idea – I mean, I know where the idea came from, but, you know, like, how did you come up with the idea? And then, you know, take me through kind of a little bit of the history of that event.
Yeah, sure thing. I was actually teaching small unit tactics at the Special Forces qualification course, and dates back to 2012. So I'm sitting in my apartment in Austin, and I'm watching this Tough Mudder stuff and the Spartan stuff. I'm like, yeah, okay. And then it just kind of slapped me in the face. There wasn't a whole lot of thought. I'm like, I can come up with a race. And then I was just like reliving my military career, and obviously one of the biggest things for you and myself was that team week of Special Forces assessment and selection, probably a week we'll never forget. So I'm looking at this, I'm like, that's the concept, that's the format. There's no team event in obstacle course racing at the moment. And so that was a distinguishing factor for us, so a way to break in. So I just did some thinking about it, and I bought some ammo crates and some bags and some sleds, and I started putting all this stuff in there. I started running around my apartment complex. People look at me like I'm insane, and I'm like, I could just recreate, obviously scale it back significantly, but just take SF selection or portions of it, and then just create a 4-person team event. And that was one of the biggest challenges, well, several, but one of them was how many people per team. So 2 is a partnership. That's not a team. 6 or 8, that's probably going to be really difficult for that many people to get together and sync schedules and stuff like that. So we kind of landed on 4. It was sort of like the perfect number. There still was significant challenges early on to get people to understand what team racing was, but really the genesis dates back to my military career in Special Forces, predominantly selection. And then watching the students go through small unit tactics and observing and watching the team dynamics and team building, storming, norming, performing, all that kind of stuff, which inherently ends up happening on every race course during the Commando Challenge, which is in essence the Green Beret Challenge.
Gotcha. Now I know you've kind of gone through several transition phases. 'Cause I remember seeing like an early video of Green Beret Challenge, and I think people were carrying around individual sandbags like by themselves, or maybe it was just like a ruck or something. And now there's like, individual in a team race. And I believe you've gone through another change as far as this past year, referring to driven. So kind of just take us through that.
So there was a lot of challenges, understanding the market and what our customer wanted, how to deliver a new format safely but challenging. Not only challenging for top tier athletes, but not to break off the people that are new to OCR. So that's a really difficult thing to figure out. So we had to play with the format a little bit. I know when we did a couple events in 2012, it was really proof of concept. And then 2015, we kind of slid into OCR mainstream. And there's people that still talk about the 2015 event in Georgia where they basically had a 40 to 45 pound sandbag almost the entire time on the course. I said 8 miles, it was probably closer to 10. So we definitely have a habit of over delivering, as you know. But the whole premise of the Green Beret Challenge was built on human performance, push, pull, carry, what your body's naturally built to do. So we wanted to stay away from, mainstream obstacle, man-made obstacle construction, all that stuff. I didn't have, the full background to dive into that right away. I wanted to use what I knew really well, and that was the push, pull, carry theory. So that's what got us started. 2016, watching some of our events grow, we thought that, we're in obstacle course racing, but we're not as relevant as a mainstream obstacle course race like Spartan or Tough Mudder or Rugged Maniac, Conquer the Gauntlet, Bone Frog guys. So we decided to come up with an individual OCR to not only remain relevant, but to increase our presence in the industry. So that was really the formation of that in 2016. A lot of lessons learned there for you young entrepreneurs listening. Study your costs and look for those hidden costs, because when you start building things from raw material, it gets kind of pricey. And your insurance costs go up, and there's a whole laundry list of things that you kind of learn on the fly, but it's been challenging. I say becoming an Army Ranger and a Green Beret was the hardest thing I've ever done. I think running a business in OCR is probably the hardest thing I've ever done.
Wow, that's quite a statement. And I'd hope that we've had Brett Stewart on the podcast, and we've talked to David Mainprize and some of the other race owners, and I'm hoping now people understand that OCR, setting up an OCR is not cheap, and it's not super easy. I think people as athletes, when sometimes we show up and you're like, oh yeah, you just throw out some markings and you have people run through the woods, it's no problem, right? It's a lot more complicated than that. And someone who with a background like yours, who's further testifying to some of the challenges and problems you encounter, I think further backs that up.
For sure. I mean, there's a laundry list of items that once I dove into this thing, I'm like, well, I never thought about that. And okay, that's kind of important. And that costs a lot of money. And from the onset, looking out into the industry as a participant, like, oh, just like you're saying, I throw some stuff together, no big deal. But from the inside out, there's so many hidden costs, and most of us, we're not getting rich in OCR. There's another reason why we're doing it. We're doing it because we have a passion for, particularly for us, growing better, building better humans, testing people mentally and physically, getting people to come out and take better care of themselves, creating that bond, that teamwork, that camaraderie that, is so inherent to us military guys, and just kind of taken parts of our life and shifted into this civilian hobby, sport industry, whatever we're called. But yeah, it's not easy. It's not cheap. But on the back end, when people cross the finish line and they come up and say, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. This is the best thing I've ever done. Thank you for doing this. That's the reward that we are looking for as race owners, especially military company race owners. We want to see the camaraderie. We want to see people grow from what we're producing, as the military did for us.
So you came to Kansas City, I think it was 2 years ago. Maybe it was last year. I get my years confused. Anyway, we had a bunch of the KCOCR people come out and do your event, and they've done all sorts of OCRs. And the number of people who, when we crossed the finish line, they were like, that was the hardest thing I've ever done. I was shocked. I was like, oh, well, you're OCR people, you should be fine. But I think it's a different type of fitness, and it's a different experience. Carrying and dragging those weights, it's awkward. So if you're not used to being uncomfortable, it suddenly becomes a real challenge. Because if you're used to just kind of settling into your pace and, you've practiced all the obstacles, you breeze through everything. But,
right.
There's certain events that you do in Green Beret Challenge that are going to hurt, period. It doesn't matter how fit you are. They're going to be uncomfortable.
For sure.
So I did the first time I did one of your events was back in 2015. It was the day after BFX Cincinnati. And someone had dropped out of a team on Sunday, and they were like, hey, Evan, you want to step in here? And I was like, yeah, I kind of did that that's my job. So I'm just not that interested.
Yep.
And they're like, it's free. And I was like, all right, I'll step in.
Yep.
So I show up, and I had a great time. I ran with 3 people I've never met before, 1 male and 2 females. And my favorite part of the whole thing was it was one of the weighted carries. So essentially it's poles, and I think we had a coffin with a bunch of sandbags in it or something. And one of the girls on my team is like, my shoulders are killing me. And she's like, Evan, you've done this a lot. Like, how do I get my shoulders to stop hurting? And I was like, you don't. That's just what it is. They just hurt, and you accept it as the pain. And the quicker you get it done, the quicker it ends. And you just kind of ride it out. So it's a different challenge. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that really plays on the mental aspect. You're like, you don't know how far that event is, and as you know, they're not short. If you're a 4-person team, you're probably carrying something 3/4 of a mile or a mile in distance. And that mental anguish as each step continues on that course, like, when's this crap going to end? And who's the madman that created this thing? And it just plays on your mental emotions. And then the flip side is, once you complete the event, like, oh, okay, cool. That really wasn't that bad. And then you move on to the next one, and you're like, oh, I got to drag this sled for a mile. Are you insane? And it's just repetitive over those 8 to 10 miles. It's definitely difficult when you're doing it, but at the end, the sense of accomplishment is huge at the end of it. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, even if your team doesn't do well, the sense of accomplishment is still there, because like you were talking about earlier with the storming, norming, forming, and, developing that bond, you're definitely closer with those 3 people, over the course of the hour to several hours it may take you to finish the course.
Yeah, no doubt. A lot of bonds. I mean, look at the Gray Berets. They were spawned from our race course.
Oh, really?
So yeah, that's the genesis of the Gray Berets. They ran our event in 2015 in Georgia, and 4 guys in particular, the founding fathers, as we call them. and they came up to me like that was the hardest thing we've ever done. And maybe a month or two later, they started come up with, they took the Green Beret and created the Gray Beret, and it's any of the guys that have been recruited into the Gray Berets are 50 and over, and are participating OCR athletes. And each year we hold a board and we nominate who we want to bring into the Gray Beret. So I had my inauguration. It's coming up on 2 years now.
Oh, nice.
So that was kind of cool that they started the Gray Berets from the Green Beret Challenge, and then I was nominated to be a part of it. This September will be 2 years.
So we're talking about, the positive emotions that come out at the end of at the finish line. Well, there's another common phrase that typically comes out of people's mouths at the end of the finish line. And I try to keep this podcast PG or maybe PG-13.
Sure.
But it's F Ballas, and a 4-letter word, obviously. So kind of where did that come from? And you've pushed it even farther, right? There's patches. Like I think I have a patch that says one. Oh no, I have the plain Green Beret Challenge one. I went with the PG one, but there's patches. People, I see people posting pictures of it and writing it out of sandbags and all sorts of crazy stuff.
I honestly have no idea who the first person is who created it. I could not even come up with a name who actually started that. It just kind of hit really quick and really fast. And I do recall, this is dating back to 2016, and we were doing our first actual OCR race in Texas, and my parents were attending, and the patches were being put out on the merchandise tent and the shirts and everything. I'm like, oh my God. So I told my staff, I was like, hey man, probably not cool for my parents to see that here, so let's save that for another race. And we all got a big laugh at it. Obviously we kept that from them. I'm sure they had seen somebody wearing the patch or the t-shirt by now. They've never said anything to me, but that wasn't something I really wanted to have on hand while my parents were hanging out at the race. But I think it started as a joke, and I think it came from when there used to be the patch of F Norm from Spartan. I think that's probably where the idea came from. So whoever started the F Ballas patch, I have no idea. It's pretty funny. And it just kind of comes from, you'll hear that phrase quite often on the race course. Back to what you're saying, you're carrying this thing, my shoulders hurt, my back hurts, everything hurts. Who is this guy? And then the common phrase gets tossed around all over the race course.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. Now, you mentioned earlier the Georgia course, and I know that's got a crazy awesome venue that I've wanted to get to, just hasn't worked out with my schedule. Are you still holding events there? And so that's one question. And the second question is, can you describe some of the venue you'd use for the Georgia course?
We've had a couple different venues in Georgia. Most recently, I guess I started about 2 years ago, up in Dawsonville, which is, you'll know this place. It's about 20, 30 minutes south of Ranger Camp.
Yeah.
Up at Dahlonega. So you know the terrain. It's not flat.
No.
So it's a friend of mine owns a farm there. He's got about 150, 175 acres. They were doing motocross predominantly, but it's just private property. He has a big lake and he's got trails and he's got woods, and they were riding their motocross bikes. And one of my participants from Georgia says, hey, I have a friend of mine has this farm. He'd be open to doing events there. So I met with him and, became friends, and we've had, I think, 4 or 5 of our events there so far. So this November 7th, we're doing our trail race series and the Commando Team Challenge, both in one day. At the Dawsonville property at Joe's farm.
Nice. And I know you've also used, essentially, it was like a disaster preparedness center in the past.
Yeah, it's called Guardian Centers. It's in central Georgia, about 30 minutes south of Macon. So it's like as you're saying, like a disaster preparedness, FEMA type facility where they do rescue operations, military training, law enforcement training, all that kind of stuff. And, hands down, the coolest venue we've ever had. But I'd say 2 years ago, the owner no longer wanted commercial events on his property, so he just wanted to focus on military and law enforcement.
Ah, okay.
The only people that are going there was the zombie race and ourselves. So we feel pretty fortunate. It's sort of like our home venue in Georgia. We really wanted to go back. but the leadership there just has different plans for the property. Every year I reach out to them like, hey, can we come back this year? And I'm like, no, we're still doing what we're doing. So I don't know if we'll ever get back there, or I hope we do one day, but it was definitely one of the coolest places to run a race.
Yeah, I remember seeing pictures from that online and just being like blown away, being like, that is such a cool obstacle course race venue. Because
Oh, it was insane.
it looks
Flood
like you're running through The Walking Dead. Like it's like a disaster everywhere, right?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, the only thing we couldn't actually climb into, they have these, intentionally blown apart buildings for, they make movies there and all kind of other crap too. But we couldn't go into the destructive buildings, but the tunnels, the flipped over subways, the flooded villages, it was just, and then if you're a creative human being, I mean, it's wide open to come up with some crazy stuff for that race.
Awesome. Now let's start talking, 2020 and beyond. What events do you have coming up? What's their format? And, what does the future look like?
We've done a couple virtual events, obviously, given what's going on in with the global climate right now. We have one more virtual event that takes place at the end of August. And then, so you just can register online at driven2perform.com, complete the challenge is set for both individuals or teams, and then you submit your results, and we send out some really cool medallions for that. But our first live event will be September 11th, our Wicked Trail series, and that's going to be, it was in Chattanooga, and we teamed up with Scenic River Mud Run with Julie Wolf, and the venue had to change. They were not going to commit to giving us a permit till a week before the race. Obviously, that makes no sense.
Oh, my goodness.
So Julie and her team found a venue only about 20 miles south of Chattanooga. It's actually in Georgia, right outside of Dalton, Georgia. So the address is updated on all the registration pages. So that Friday, we're going to do our trail race, and then I'm helping Julie out with her obstacle course race that Saturday. And then there's a mini endurance challenge with some of her fitness friends are putting on that afternoon on Saturday as well. So it'll be 3 events across that weekend, September 11th and 12th. We're back in Kansas City October 10th with our trail race series, and back in Georgia at Anderson Farms, which is now Lily Creek Farm. They've rebranded themselves, and that's November 7th.
Okay. And then for looking forward to 2021, the name of the company Green Beret Challenge is no longer a thing, right? It's now Driven. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true. So what happened is, back in 2012, when I had this vision of the Green Beret Challenge and this team race, I had no idea of where this could go. I didn't have any lateral vision of creating multiple events under that branded name. So we got to a point where we've dabbled in so many different events. We have some 12 and 24-hour challenges. We have an obstacle course race. We have a short course. We have the team challenge. It just didn't make sense from a marketing perspective and branding perspective of all these different events under Green Beret Challenge. It just didn't make sense. And this has probably been in the making for a couple of years. And then given this lull of racing this year, is sort of the right time to take a step back, relook at everything we've done. What do we want to do in the future, and how does it make sense from a branding and marketing perspective? So after some wargaming and lots of late nights to sit around thinking, we come up with Driven, which is it's a powerful word when you look at human performance. And that's really what we are. We're more of a human performance company that produces events than just a single obstacle course race or a single team race. So Driven, we adopted, and we've individually branding all the events under the parent company. So we have the Commando Challenge, which was the Green Beret Challenge, both individually and team. We have Octane, which is our short course we've developed. We have the Wicked Trail Race series, and we still have the 12 and 24-hour events, although based on what's going on this year, we just haven't found a really good window to be able to produce all these. So hopefully moving forward in 2021, some of the restrictions loosen up. Some of the venues get a little bit more comfortable with us coming out. And that's really the biggest thing for us. I can't speak for other race companies. Our biggest challenge was finding venues that were allowing us to come out and host events. The state parks were a little nervous. Your public places definitely are not interested in having a bunch of people on their property. But luckily, we have some relationships with some friends that it's privately owned property and property rather, and they're completely fine with us coming out. So hopefully, 2021, the restrictions on some of the other venues that we use loosen up, and we get back to a more full schedule of racing.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to it. And like I said, I've done your team race back in 2015. I've done team race, and I think it was 2018. Individual race, also 2018. So
Yep.
it's a great series of events. And what I really liked about the individual event was how, you mentioned you build all your own obstacles, and it was like, it has like a really gritty feeling. I really like it how the rig was like wooden trussing with ropes,
Yep.
as opposed to being like this man-made metal superstructure with these like pre-made holds. It was very, like I said, gritty. Yeah. And it was also, the individual race still had a lot of carries in it. So it really evened out, really favored to a different type of athlete, where I remember being in like fifth place or something, like a mile in, because it was like all heavy carries at the beginning, and the bigger guys were just, it was less of their body weight, and they were just cruising along. So it was cool to see some guys up front who normally are, in the first mile are typically a little bit further back. So
You're saying everything I wanted to achieve. So when we started that individual course, we still wanted to keep that flavor of the Greenberry Challenge with the push pull carry stuff. And I said from the onset, I want to see a different athlete winning these races. I want to see a well-rounded endurance athlete winning some of these obstacle course races. Because typically it's the dude that can run the fastest, that has good obstacle technique. So I want to keep it raw. I want to keep it gritty. I made a comment actually this a few years ago. Beard and I were in Canada, and we were building this monster low rig out of these fresh cut logs. There was no dimensions that were equal. And he's like, dude, man, why don't you just get some like metal and we'll build a metal rig? I was like, I'll never have metal on my race course. So he's holding me accountable to that. We talk about it all the time. We always laugh about it. But I wanted that military feel and that military look of just rugged, raw. I mean, when you run up to that thing, it's a monster. You got these big 6x6 timbers and these ropes hanging off. Like, yeah, that looks pretty grueling. So we wanted the raw, gritty military feel, but we still wanted to maintain all our endurance events, or at least some of them that we could do individually. And just to see a different type of athlete come out and give it a chance for, some of these other athletes to be hitting the podium in our races.
awesome. Well, yeah, I think the one individual one I did, I thought you hit the nail on the head there. So great job there.
Thanks, buddy.
Let's start talking about some of your military experiences and military training. Now, we mentioned you worked at Special Forces qualification course. So
Yep.
if people aren't unfamiliar, essentially there's a 2 to 3 week tryout process called selection, which, a lot of the aspects were taken onto the TV show, the History Channel, The Selection, or if you follow Go Ruck, The Selection, when they do their events. But the real one's 2 to 3 weeks long. And then they do a 14-month pipeline where it's broken down by phases, where people have to do small unit tactics, so essentially patrolling in the woods, where you carry your backpack and go on pretend missions. Language phase, you learn a foreign language, you learn a specialty, like engineer or medical or weapons and stuff like that. And then there's like a big culmination exercise called Robin Sage. Now, you said you worked in the small unit tactics phase. That's correct?
Yeah, correct.
All right. Now, take us through, at that point, guys had already been through I'd say the really, really physical, difficult stuff. I mean, small unit tactics is not easy, but,
Right.
the point where they're like purposely trying to push you out of the course by breaking you is already past. At this point, it's more of competency and ability to learn skills. But can you take us through some of the, from your, because as an instructor, you saw hundreds of people go through the course, like what was separating the guys who persevered and finished the small unit tactics versus the ones that would quit or fail?
Um, so SUT, aside from selection, as you mentioned, is definitely the hardest and most rigorous portion. You get through that, go back to your home unit, and then once you get orders to actually attend the actual course, you show up. Um, so sometimes there's a delay. Depends on orders, depends on your unit, depends on when the next qualification course starts. So that could be a few months to almost a year waiting to attend the actual course. So
I'm gonna interrupt for a second. Yeah, I went to selection and then went on a 14-month deployment and then a 6-month officer training, plus probably about 2 months of moves before I went back to the Q course.
yeah, so
I had almost 2 years between selection and starting the course.
yeah, so you know where I'm going with this. Like, I went to selection '97, and then it was a year later I went to the Q course '98. But I was also in the Ranger Regiment, and it's expected to remain in shape, tip top shape at all times. So fitness was a non-issue for me. From some of these other units that may not pride themselves on being absolutely physically fit, and you have 6 months to a year or more, or military combat deployment between those two events, then you're not getting quality fitness if you're hanging out in Baghdad or if you're hanging out in Afghanistan, other than slamming weights.
That's right.
So your endurance goes out the window.
Straight
And
garbage. Yep.
yes, you're eating like crap. The deal. Especially if you're sitting in some cob or fob eating MREs for 14 months, and you're absolutely worthless. So a lot of different variables. So when they do arrive, they are expected to be in some semblance of decent shape. We do put them through a PT test on day one when they arrive at SUT. Road marches, obstacle courses, all the stuff that you would see you did in selection. We'll revisit that during the first week of SUT. But the foundation of that is creating leaders and learning how to operate with sleep and food deprivation under extreme conditions. It get really hot in North Carolina in the summertime, and actually can get really cold in the winter. And the location that we hold this course is in the swampy part of North Carolina. It's not really significant elevation change, but you're constantly wet, and it doesn't matter what time of the year. If you go through the winter or go through the summer, you're getting buried in those swamps, and that's the way it is. So aside from the physical challenges of carrying an 80, 90, 120 pound rucksack every day for 8 weeks, is the mental challenge of being thrown into a team with 11 other dudes and figuring it out. So you go back to the whole storming, norming, performing phase of team building and leadership. Every day when we go out on a patrol, there's a new key leader, there's new assignments and new missions. So you have to learn how to work together, put your physical agony aside, and learn how to be a team player, how to best accomplish that mission, and then switch out and repeat the same thing the next day with a different group of dudes. So it's an evolution that's always changing every 4 to 6 hours, and we change the scenarios based on student input, what they do or fail to do. So a lot of variables are thrown there, right? And what they think they've got a solid plan, and maybe they didn't plan for a contingency, and we'll throw that contingency in there just to throw them off. So constantly keeping those wheels spinning from a mental perspective, and learn how to deal with ambiguity, how to deal with an uncertain environment and variables that you cannot control. And that spans, they've changed the course a couple times. When I went through, it was 8 weeks. When I taught, some classes were 6, some classes were 8, but every couple of years they're always kind of changing the course a little bit. The good idea fairy shows up and
Yeah, he's always floating around.
Yeah, for sure, especially out there at Camp McCall.
Yeah.
But I think, to your point, that the successful people come from the combat arms, that come from the Ranger Regiment, come from the 82nd Airborne, 101st Airborne, and some of your more prolific infantry units. I think some of the challenges are from what we call in the military soft skill MOSs. So if you were maybe a truck driver, or you were a pack clerk, or you had a non-combat MOS, this patrolling and small unit tactics is very foreign to you, and you probably have never been exposed to it before. So that learning curve is huge. Plus you got this backpack on your back every day, and you're just getting crushed. And and you're just drinking from the fires, and it doesn't slow down. You
No.
either keep up or you're out. So it comes down to that personal initiative, responsibility of just bearing down and making it happen and getting your mind right. Because we're not slowing down for anybody. We don't have time. You're either on board, and you can hang, or maybe it's not for you, or maybe you get and this has happened to many people. They'll go through the course and there'll be a non-select for moving forward. They'll get recycled back into that phase of training. They'll get a month or 6 weeks off to regroup, maybe work on their fitness, work on some of their tactical and technical proficiencies. And if it's a student that's worth saving, we see some potential, and he'll get recycled and he gets a chance to come back. But the other side is the attributes. So your performance, how you interface with other team members, and how you interface with cadre can be huge. If you just got a crappy attitude and you're not there for the right reasons, the course will expose those weaknesses, and then those are the folks that will not get an opportunity to come back. Yeah,
100% agree with, everything you just said. Just spot on pretty much on all aspects. So, I remember, Ranger School, we've talked about when we had Mark Odette, we talked a lot about Ranger School. Compared to small unit tactics, from my experience, the sleep deprivation was not nearly as bad, but the weights were heavier on the backpacks. Like I remember doing some movements and being like, this is so heavy, it is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I liked small unit tactics because it was set up in my opinion, a more realistic manner where, we do a couple days in a row of like nonstop operations, and then we go back and reset and refit.
Sure.
And then plan and then go back out for a couple days. Versus Ranger School was just like, we're just going to drive you into the ground nonstop for 2 months. And people are borderline non-functional at Ranger School.
It's all about how can I ruin your life for the next 8 weeks?
Yeah, it's insane.
Of the world.
Versus you're absolutely exhausted and tired and sleepy and hungry at SUT, but it made more sense. It was more realistic in my opinion.
Yeah.
And
a lot of people ask, like, what's the comparison? What's the differences at SUT and the Q course? The truth is we're not trying to replicate Ranger School in any shape or form. We're trying to replicate what a 12-man team will possibly do in an extreme environment, regardless of where it's at on the globe. So as you alluded to, the weights are extreme. So you have a 12-man team, 2 is 1, 1 is none. I'm carrying 2 med kits. I'm carrying 2 radios. I'm carrying double basic load of ammo. I'm carrying 2 of everything. And you've got a cross load across the team, and it gets ridiculous. So that is definitely the biggest differences. And then some of the cats going out on a specific mission will even having more weight, depending what your function is for that particular patrol.
Yep.
But it was never an intent, and it never will be the intent to replace Ranger School. It's just learning how to do combat operations in a somewhat denied or completely denied territory with little to no support, and everything's on your back.
I don't remember how much my backpack was at SUT because I don't really remember weighing them very often. I just remember it being significantly heavy.
Yeah.
However, for the final exercise, essentially, Rob and Sage, you pretend to infill a foreign country, which is essentially you're going into some random part of North Carolina. And for that one, we did weigh our backpacks. And my backpack was I thought we were on the lighter side compared to some of the other teams. They were 120 pounds each.
It's exactly. I was just going to say mine was 120 when I weighed in, and we actually jumped into Pineland.
Oh.
So, yeah, I had a D3 at 1,000 feet. I was on the ground in like 15, 20 seconds, just getting sucked to the ground with that rucksack.
Yeah, I remember. So, one, you couldn't put the backpack on by picking it up. Like, I had to sit down and then, like, roll onto all fours and then stand up.
Yep.
And I remember breathing heavy. I wasn't moving. Like, you're just standing there and you're breathing heavy because there's so much weight pressing on your lungs. Yep. You're like, and during our infill, our instructor kept being like, he's like, we should stop and take a rest. And I'd be like, just keep moving. I was like, it's not going to get any easier.
Yep.
And we we were apparently ahead of schedule. I didn't know this at the time because I'm just a student, but
Yep.
we're ahead of schedule. And he takes one of our guides and that was supposed to be guiding us into the territory and is like, he essentially gives him a leg injury. So now we have this like 200-pound dude plus all of our backpacks, and we're playing some shuttle game where like you carry your backpacks forward, you have to go back for the guy,
Yep.
and you have to keep security at all times. So it's like,
Yep.
it was like torture. We're going up this hill. Yeah, good
We
times.
we had an 18-hour infill, so we parachuted in, linked up with our partisan, and he gave us the location of this camp, and we walked for 18 hours. And there was a few other Bat Boys on my team. Bat Boys refers to guys from a Ranger Regiment. So there's a few of us Bat Boys on my team, and two of them were from my company down at 175 in Savannah. So we'd known each other for a few years now, and we were like, hell with this, man. We're just going to keep on going until we get there. But like you, we're not stopping. It's just the agony is just going to continue until we get to where we're going. So let's just get it done. But yeah, that was kind of interesting, 18 hours. And then once we got to a location near the base camp, that there's some representative there, and he walked us in circles for 3 hours too. So
Yeah.
the next night you finally get there, and then the games begin.
Yeah. And if you're hearing these stories, again, like you said earlier, true to its source material, like some of your races are longer than they necessarily advertise, and the weights
Right.
feel heavier than maybe they advertise.
Yep, for sure.
Now, at Camp McCall, there's a famous obstacle course called Nasty Nick.
Mm-hmm.
Can you, for the OCR people that are listening, which is pretty much everyone that's listening to this podcast, can you describe Nasty Nick in terms of, maybe compare it to some other series or compare it to something that they're more familiar with? Because I've done it twice, and it was, I don't even know how many years ago. It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Years ago. So I did Nasty Nick and I did the Derby Queen before I got into OCR. So my memory of it may be a little bit skewed. But I think you have more recent experiences of it than I do.
Yeah, I've done it more times than I care to remember, but I'm not sure we can either the Derby, probably compare the Derby a little bit more to OCR than the Nasty Nick, because they're just so massive. So it's not as long. It's roughly a mile long. There's no like push, pull, carry type events other than the cadre smoking you in between obstacles just to keep your heart rate up. The rope climbs, I don't know, 25, 30 feet. So you go, the first major obstacle is like a 30-foot rope climb, transition to a diagonal rope down. Then the other one that sticks out to me is the caving ladders that are on an angle, and that's at least 30, if not 40 feet in the air. And you're climbing up these caving ladders, and they're wobbling left to right, and just holding on for dear life to get up over the top and come back down the other side. So I think the biggest takeaway is just there's just obstacle after obstacle. There's probably, I lost count, maybe 20, 22 obstacles jammed in that mile. So, every 10 steps, every 15 steps, you have an engagement. So you get no break. And it's just obstacle after obstacle. There's a couple tunnels in there. There's a lot of ropes, a lot of rope climbs.
I remember there being a ton of rope climbs. And like you said, the obstacles are back. The obstacles are back to back. And it's not like, hop over this low wall. It's like legit big obstacle builds. It's a permanent course. So they don't.
Yeah. I mean, they'll build out these huge telephone poles.
Yeah.
There's some gnarly technical ones too. Like you got to sit there and like, I don't know how I'm doing this. Anybody else want to go in front of me? But you're running the whole time. So, you're competing. Whether you're doing it in a selection or whether you're doing a Q course, everything's a test, everything's a competition, everything's a race. So you just, when they say go, you just get after it and you figure it out.
Right on. All right. I think we're going to start wrapping things up. Before we go, we like to ask, tell us something people would be surprised to know about you. So what do you got for us, Mark?
I'm glad this is a PG show. Good on you. There's a few, but one that sticks out is some of my close friends though, but actually joined the Army on a dare.
That's interesting.
My college girlfriend said to me one day, I was bartending, going to school, whatever, and she said, "Hey, um, what do you do with your life?" I'm like, "I don't know. I'm going to school, bartending, playing softball. I mean, I have no idea." She's like, "Oh, I think you should join the military. My dad did. It was like the best thing ever." I'm like, "Nah, no desire to do such a thing." Um, but at the same time, a really good friend of mine back in Western Pennsylvania that had been in the Army got out and was going back in, and we talked about it. And we were sitting in his parents' basement reading this magazine, had these Army Rangers on the scene. He's like, "Hey, I'm going to be an Army Ranger. What are those dudes?" So we started reading this thing, and it was excerpt of some guys in the Psalms down at 6RTB. And I'm like, "Oh, that looks pretty cool." So fast forward, he goes back on active duty, calls me. This is way before cell phones. So he calls my parents' house. "Hey, I'm down in Savannah at this Ranger unit. You need to go talk to this recruiter." So I'm kind of getting jazzed up about it. I'm not telling my college girlfriend anything. And so I go to the recruiter. Long story short, I joined the Army. My parents were pretty surprised too, because I didn't talk to them until after. I come home and say, "Hey, join the Army today," and they about lost their mind. And my grandmother's crying, "Oh, what are you doing?" And so I go to dinner that night with my college girlfriend and say, "Hey, I was thinking a lot about what you said about my life and what I should do." I said, "I took your advice and I joined the Army today." And she's like, "I was joking." I go, "Well, I leave in 6 weeks, so there's that."
I'm guessing that relationship didn't last much longer.
You know how that goes. Yeah. By the time basic training was over, she had already been moved on to something else. So
Yeah.
a new Jody for sure. But all joking aside, it was hands down the best decision I ever made for myself.
Yeah. 100% agree on that also. I've loved, while I don't love every specific aspect of my Army experience, I love it as an overall thing. It's just been great.
Yeah.
Opened up so many doors and taught me such a wide variety of skills. That's been, you can't learn some of that stuff anywhere else. Like you just can't, you have to learn it through experience and through, the unique skill sets that they teach you.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, just like you said, it's opened up every single door since getting out of the military. Everything that I've gotten involved in had some relationship to my military background, my experience, or connections I made throughout my military career.
Right on. Yeah, I joined the Army because I was in the Boy Scouts, and a couple of the older boys went in, and I liked Boy Scouts, and I saw the Army as like the next logical step.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of is.
And it actually was a step. It was my Boy Scout troop when I was, I'm in high school, was like extremely militant. Like, I mean, we used to wear combat boots and go to the shooting range. Like, I got in trouble in high school because I had pictures of me and my friends at the shooting range in my locker. I got called to the principal's office as a senior. And actually, when I went into, I went to the officer side, so I went to ROTC when I entered college.
Yep.
And it actually felt like a step backwards. Like, the people in ROTC, again, because you're not in with just combat arms dudes, you're with the whole spectrum. So, like, the people in ROTC seem softer than my Boy Scout troop. I was like, what's wrong with you people? You guys got to, like, man up a little bit more. So,
yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
All right. Now, before we go, any final news you want to share, shout outs you want to give, or final plugs for upcoming events?
Just hoping we can get things back on track this year. I know it's a lot of race companies are suffering, us included. So hopefully, what I really like is for the participants to feel safe and want to come back out and start racing and follow their passions of what got them started in this industry. Just come on out, support your local race companies. Just want to reach out to my pro team, Lance Johnson, Richard Estep, and Austin Hutchins, Don and Rosie, part of our crew, and Mallory, Tim, and Chris are our ambassadors throughout the United States and Georgia, Ohio, and Texas. And we hope to see you guys here racing the second half of this year.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to hear more from Lance, we had him on the podcast, I don't know, it was like probably 2 years ago. So you can dig through the archives and find him in there. We go into, again, deep dive into Green Beret Challenge at the time. And I think for those people who are a little more nervous about going back into the race environment, I think your event's a perfect, like, step into that environment because, 4-man teams, you can show up with your small group and you can wait at the back of the start wave and, go, and you're socially distant from everyone but the 3 people you showed up with. So I think that's very, very logical step for anyone that may be nervous. But
as well as our trail series too, we specifically changed one of the events. It was actually, we were going to do the Octane obstacle course in Kansas City, and we talked to the venue, and they were more comfortable with us doing a trail race. So that's why we switched that a couple months ago. So they can social distance and we can make it safe for everyone, and we're not worried about people touching obstacles, all that kind of stuff. So whatever your thoughts are, you just come on out, have a good time with us, and hopefully we get past this crap.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you make sure now's the time to be supporting brands like Mark's and local series. So to make sure they're still around, 3-4 years down the line. So, grab your friends, bring them out to the race, and, have a great time. And for any of our listeners, you can order books and Bleg mitts off my website, teamstrengthspeed.com. If you like a lot of the special operations, special forces talk we had on this podcast, I suggest you pick up a copy of my book, Ultra-OCR Man from Special Forces Soldier to Record-Setting Professional Obstacle Course Racer. It's available on digital, hard copy, and audiobook. And I essentially have 2 chapters in there that essentially go through random war stories and Ranger School and selection and some of the other stuff. Actually, I don't really dive too deep into selection. I go to very high wave tops on that. But you get a lot of war stories in there. I had some friends read it, and they were like I forgot I was reading an obstacle course racing book for 2 chapters. It was they really, a lot of the stories. I would tell, if I told you, Mark, you'd be like, oh yeah, I have a similar story.
Sure.
But for civilians, it's like, you guys were doing what now?
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, it's
no big deal.
Yeah, no big deal. So, anyone who likes military stuff, I think you really enjoy that. And then obviously the obstacle course racing stuff, or they wrote it in a manner where I think anyone can pick it up, whether you're obstacle course racer or just someone who likes a good story. And then also Conquer the Gauntlet Pro OCR Workouts to Go. So my latest book is now available on Amazon. So it's on digital download. And I just figured out how to do like hard copy publishing through Amazon. So if someone prefers a hard copy of that book, you can pick it up there too. It's just 75 plus workouts. Essentially, it's like a pocket workout book that you can carry with you, whether you're going to travel or, just looking for something different to do. And it's broken down by topic and venue, right? So if you have access to a gym, a normal gym, if you have access to a ninja type gym, or just like the crappy gym in your hotel, it gives you a bunch of workouts you can do that are OCR specific, focused for your specific set of goals that can help you prepare. And it was written by a combination of me and then other members of the Conquer the Gauntlet Pro team. So you'll see workouts there labeled like Randy Lackey's ab complex or something like that, or Matt Willis's Killington mountain prep. So a lot of specific workouts in there written by the athletes again who actually do them. All right, we're gonna get going. Mark, it was great talking to you. Hope to see you later this year in Kansas City. I don't think I'm working that weekend, so I think I'm available. So I will be out there, and yeah, let's get through this, and we'll get back to normal racing again soon.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Evan.
All right.